The gunfire was not supposed to reach the medical bay. Valera pressed herself against the cold metal wall, her 4 fingers wrapped tight around the edge of a supply shelf. The lights had gone red 20 seconds ago. She could hear boots hitting the deck plates outside, fast and heavy, and underneath that noise something else. Something she had never heard before. A low sound that came from a human throat, somewhere between a growl and a warning. She had been on this station for 11 months. She had catalogued human behavior with the careful attention of a trained xenobiologist. She had written down their habits, their eating patterns, their sleep cycles. She had watched them lift cargo that would have broken the back of any Tavari. She had seen them work for 16 hours without stopping and then laugh about it. She had observed them bleed from small wounds and keep going. She had even watched one of them, a young technician named Cole, snap his own dislocated shoulder back into place with a grunt and then finish his shift. She had written in her field notes, "These beings appear to feel pain but choose to ignore it. Further observation required." But she had never thought of them as warriors. She thought of them as stubborn animals, loud, soft-skinned, dangerously unpredictable. Her people, the Tavari, had been among the stars for 300 years before humanity even built their first colony ship. The Tavari were elegant, precise. They did not shout. They did not bleed on equipment. They did not laugh at things that were not funny. Valera had told her research supervisor before leaving Tavar Prime that she expected the assignment to be dull. "Humans are simple creatures," she had said. "Emotionally overactive, physically fragile, prone to poor decisions. I will be home before the next turning." Her supervisor had smiled in that way. Older Tavari smiled when they knew something you did not. Valera had not understood that smile until right now. The door to the medical bay blew inward. She dropped behind the supply shelf on instinct, her heart hammering with all 4 of its chambers, her secondary eyelids snapping shut against the smoke. Through the haze, 2 figures in dark armor came through the opening. They were Keth raiders. She recognized the angular helmets, the stripped-down plasma weapons they favored for close-quarters work. The Keth had been raiding station corridors for resources since the trade lanes collapsed 6 months ago. She had read the reports. She had thought, that is a problem for other people. It was now her problem. One of the Keth spotted her immediately. Its head turned, the helmet sensors locking on. It took 1 step forward. The wall behind it exploded. Not the wall, the door frame. Someone had hit it from outside with enough force to send the Keth raider flying sideways into a medical cart. Equipment crashed and scattered across the floor. Valera stared, frozen. A human walked through the broken frame. He was not large as humans went. She had seen larger. His name was Garrett. She had catalogued him in her notes as Subject 7, a station security officer, age 31, moderate build, habitually late to morning briefings. She had noted that he had a small scar on his jaw and that he drank his coffee with too much sugar. He had a split lip now and blood running from somewhere above his ear. His body armor was cracked on the left side. He held a standard-issue pulse rifle in both hands with the practiced stillness of someone who had done this before. The second Keth raider swung its weapon toward him. Garrett was already moving. She had never seen a human move like that. It was not graceful. It was not the smooth, efficient motion of a Tavari security officer running a training drill. It was something rawer than that. Something she did not have a word for in her language. He crossed the distance between himself and the raider in 3 steps, dropped under the shot, came up inside the raider's guard, and drove the butt of his rifle into the helmet with a crack that echoed off the walls. The raider went down. Garrett stood over it for a moment, breathing hard. Then he looked across the room and found her behind the shelf. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She realized she had been holding her breath. She let it out slowly. "No," she said. "Good." He glanced at the 2 raiders, checked them both quickly, and then looked back at her. "Stay low. There are 2 more in the next corridor." He was already moving toward the door again. Valera stared at his back, at the cracked armor, at the blood he was leaving on the floor in small, quiet drops. She opened her field notes on her data pad with trembling hands. She deleted the line that said, "Humans appear to feel pain but choose to ignore it." She wrote instead, "I was wrong about almost everything." Garrett did not come back for 40 minutes. Valera spent those 40 minutes doing two things. The first was applying pressure to a shallow plasma burn on her left forearm that she had not noticed during the initial chaos. The second was sitting very still and listening to the sounds of the station around her. She heard shouting in the corridor, Garrett's voice, and at least one other human voice she did not recognize, clipped and sharp, trading information back and forth. She heard something heavy fall. She heard the particular whine of a plasma weapon being discharged twice in quick succession, and then silence. Then she heard Garrett say, clearly and with no particular drama, "Corridor 3 is clear." A woman's voice responded through a comm unit, "Copy. We've got 2 down near the cargo lift. Medic is coming to you. Send them to medical bay first. I've got a Tavari researcher in there who needs a check." Valera looked down at her arm. The burn was not serious. She had already cleaned it and wrapped it with the supplies on the shelves around her. She did not need a medic. But she found that the simple fact of him remembering she was there, in the middle of a firefight, while bleeding from his own head, had done something strange to her composure. When Garrett finally came through the door again, he was accompanied by a young woman named Dana, who carried a medical kit and moved with the brisk efficiency of someone who had done field medicine in bad conditions before. Dana took one look at Valera's wrapped arm, nodded with what appeared to be approval, and then turned her attention to Garrett. "Sit," Dana said. "I'm fine. You have a head wound and you've been in a firefight for the last 30 minutes. Sit down, Garrett." He sat on the edge of a medical table with the expression of a man who was humoring someone he respected. Dana worked quickly, cleaning the cut above his ear, checking his pupils, pressing 2 fingers against the side of his jaw where a bruise was already spreading dark against his skin. Valera watched all of this from across the room. She was trying to understand something. She had watched humans interact before: meals, arguments, briefings, the small social rituals of station life that she had cataloged and categorized and noted. But this was different. This was 2 people who trusted each other in a way that did not require words. Dana moved around Garrett with the confidence of someone who had patched him up before, and Garrett sat still and let her work with the patience of someone who understood this was necessary even when he wanted to be moving. "The Keth team was 5, Garrett said while Dana worked. "We got 4. One escaped through the maintenance shaft near the water recycling unit. Station command has been notified." "What were they after?" Valera asked. Both humans looked at her. She had not planned to speak. The question had simply come out. "Medical supplies, probably," Garrett said. "Or the data cores. Keth raiders have been hitting research stations along this stretch for months. They're not after people, just resources." "They were pointing weapons at me." "Yeah," he met her eyes. "That's why I came in." Valera looked at him. He said it simply, without any particular weight, as though it were obvious. As though there were nothing worth noting in the fact that he had walked into an active firefight against armed Keth raiders to protect a Tavari xenobiologist who had, in 11 months of working on the station, never once spoken more than 40 consecutive words to him. "You knew I was in here?" she asked. "I saw you come in about an hour before the alert. When the bay doors locked down, I figured you were still inside." "You remembered that?" "I remember where all the civilians are," he said, as though this were the most natural thing in the world. Dana finished her work, packed her kit, and gave Garrett a look that communicated several things at once without a single word. He nodded. She left. The room was quiet for a moment. Valera turned her data pad over in her hands. 11 months of notes, observations and measurements and careful categorizations. She had written things like, Humans demonstrate poor situational awareness when emotionally compromised. She had written, humans appear to overestimate their physical capabilities. She had written, human decision-making is reactive rather than strategic. She looked at Garrett. He was sitting on the edge of the medical table, checking his rifle with the methodical attention of someone performing a routine they could do in their sleep. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He looked up, "Sure." "You were bleeding before you came through that door. I could see the blood on the floor. You were already injured." "Took a hit in the first corridor," he said with a slight shrug. "Nothing serious." "You continued anyway." "Of course." "Why?" He looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not immediately interpret. It was not confusion, exactly. It was more like the expression of someone who had been asked why the sky was a certain color, slightly puzzled that the question needed asking at all. "Because you were in here," he said. "I am a researcher from another species. We have barely spoken. You have no obligation to me." "I have an obligation to everyone on this station," Garrett said. He said it evenly, without heat, without any of the emotional inflation that she had come to expect from human communication. "That's what I signed up for." Valera sat with that for a moment. In Tavari culture, obligation was a formal thing. It came with contracts and ceremony and careful delineation of responsibility. You knew exactly to whom you owed what, and the boundaries of that debt were recorded and respected. The idea that someone might feel a boundless, undifferentiated obligation to every living being in a given space was not something her culture had a clean word for. She was going to need a new word. "Your head wound," she said. "It needs to be kept dry for at least 12 hours, and you should not be operating in high-stress conditions until Dana has done a full neurological assessment." Garrett looked mildly amused. "Are you giving me medical advice?" "I am a scientist. I have read your species' medical literature extensively as part of my research." He considered this. "Okay, I'll tell Dana." "She already knows," Valera said. "She told you with her expression when she left. You understood her." He blinked. "You caught that?" "I have been studying human nonverbal communication for 11 months. She paused. "I was not previously very good at understanding it. I am improving." Something shifted in his expression, not amusement exactly, something warmer than that. "You've been watching us this whole time." "That is my assignment." "What have you learned?" Valera looked at her data pad. Then she set it down on the shelf beside her and looked at him directly instead. "I have learned," she said slowly, "that I arrived with a great many assumptions and that most of them were incorrect." Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then, "What kind of assumptions?" She thought about how to answer honestly without being unkind. The Tavari valued precision in communication. She had never been taught to soften a truth, only to deliver it carefully. "I believed," she said, "that humans were impulsive, driven primarily by emotion, that your physical strength was overrated given your lack of any natural armor or enhanced sensory capability, that your species' rapid expansion through the galaxy was a function of aggression rather than genuine capability." She paused. "I also thought your coffee was unhygienic." Garrett stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. It was not a polite laugh. It was a genuine one, the kind that caught him a little off guard, and it made the bruise on his jaw shift in a way that was probably uncomfortable. "That's a lot," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "I have a great deal to revise." He studied her with that warm expression again. "And the coffee?" "The coffee," she said carefully, "I reserve judgment on." He laughed again, softer this time, and reached up to touch the bandage above his ear with the careful fingers of someone remembering it was there. Outside, the station hummed with the quiet activity of the aftermath, voices over comms, boots in corridors, the slow machinery of people putting things back in order. Valera picked up her data pad again. She began a new section of notes. She titled it, "What I Did Not Understand." She wrote for a long time. Station Command held a debrief the following morning. Valera attended because she was required to give an account of what she had witnessed in the medical bay. She sat in the back of the briefing room and listened to the security team go through the incident with the same careful, unhurried efficiency she had seen in Garrett the night before. They named the 4 Keth raiders who had been subdued. They identified the escape route of the 5th. They noted the damage to 3 corridor sections and the medical bay door. They discussed response times and communication failures and the particular vulnerability of maintenance shaft access points. There were 12 humans in the room. Valera watched all of them. She noticed that the woman leading the debrief, a station security chief named Louise, did not raise her voice once. She asked direct questions and received direct answers, and when she disagreed with something she said so plainly and moved on. She had a way of holding a room's attention that was not based on authority alone, it was something else. Valera had no precise word for it in Tavari. She wrote, presence. She noticed that the team argued, not loudly but genuinely. There was a disagreement between Garrett and a man named Pete about whether the initial corridor lockdown had been fast enough. They went back and forth on it for several minutes with the ease of people who had disagreed before and survived it. Louise listened, asked 2 questions, and then made a decision. Both men accepted it without resentment. Valera wrote, they disagree and then continue working. She had observed this before but had always categorized it as instability. She was now reconsidering the category. She noticed, above all else, the way they talked about the parts that had gone wrong. In Tavari debrief culture, errors were noted and documented and attributed carefully to specific failures in protocol. It was a precise and somewhat formal process. The goal was correction. The emotional dimension of having made a mistake was not, professionally speaking, considered relevant. Here Louise said, we were slow on the medical bay corridor, 30 seconds slower than we should have been. That put Garrett in a position where he was going in without backup. She paused. That's on me. I made the wrong call on the initial deployment. Garrett said, you made the best call with the information you had. It wasn't good enough. It kept the rest of the corridor clear while I handled the bay. We'd have had a worse outcome the other way. Louise looked at him steadily. You always do this. I do what? Make my mistakes sound like strategy. Maybe they were. Maybe you should let me take responsibility for my own decisions, Garrett. Yeah, he said after a beat, fair. Valera stared at her pad and realized she had stopped taking notes without noticing. There was something in that exchange that she could not fully process. It was not an argument. It was not apology, exactly, or forgiveness. It was 2 people negotiating the space between a mistake and its meaning, and they were doing it with the kind of honesty that required both parties to be unafraid of what they might find. She had not thought humans were capable of that kind of honesty. She had observed them avoiding difficult conversations, softening bad news, performing emotions they did not feel. She had written, humans are indirect communicators, frequently prioritizing social comfort over accurate information exchange. She was going to need to revise that note considerably. After the debrief, she caught up to Garrett in the corridor outside. You defended her, she said. He glanced at her. Louise, she made a good call. She said it was a mistake. It was a mistake that worked out. That happens sometimes. He shrugged. Beating yourself up about it doesn't help. We've got a job to do. That is not how my species processes error, Valera said. How does your species process it? She thought for a moment, carefully, with considerable documentation. We assign causation very precisely, and we expect the person responsible to acknowledge their failure in full and to take corrective steps that can be audited. Garrett considered this as they walked. Sounds exhausting. It is very thorough. What does it do for the person who made the mistake? Emotionally, I mean. Valera opened her mouth and then closed it again. In truth, she had never been asked that question before. Error in Tavari culture was a practical matter. You fixed it. The emotional component, the weight of having been wrong, the complexity of guilt and recovery, was not something that received formal attention. It was assumed you would manage it privately. I do not know, she admitted. I have never thought to ask. Garrett nodded slowly. Back home, my dad used to say that the goal isn't to never make a mistake. The goal is to make the same mistake as few times as possible, and not to let the mistakes you've already made turn into walls. He paused. I don't know if that translates. It does, Valera said, imperfectly, but it does. They had reached the junction that led toward the research wing. She would go left. He would go right back toward the security station. She paused at the junction. The Keth raider who escaped, she said. Do you expect a second attempt? Always plan for one, he said. We're upgrading the shaft access protocols today and running a full sweep tonight. I don't think they'll be back soon. Raids like this depend on surprise. They lost surprise. He looked at her. You planning to stay in the medical bay alone again anytime soon? I was reviewing samples, she said, slightly defensive. I know. Just, if you need access to the bay outside standard hours, let the security desk know. We can make sure someone does a pass. She studied him. That is a formal protocol change. It's common sense, he said. You are adjusting your security routine to account for my presence. I'm adjusting it to account for all the civilians in this wing. You're one of them. He said it simply, the way he seemed to say everything, as though the logic were obvious and the action cost nothing. Valera realized she had been waiting for the qualifier, the but or the however or the unless. In her experience, generosity from one species toward another usually came with a clause. We will do this, but you owe us. We will accommodate you, however you must provide something in return. There was no qualifier. She filed the observation carefully. Thank you, she said, for last night. You don't have to thank me. I know I do not have to. I am doing it because I want to. She paused. I am told that is a human distinction. Something crossed his face, not quite a smile, but close to one. Yeah, he said, it is. He turned down the right corridor. She turned down the left. She walked back to her research quarters and sat down at her desk and looked at 11 months of notes. She thought about the last 24 hours. She thought about the word she had been searching for since she watched him come through that door. The word her language did not have. The word that described what she had seen in the way he moved, and the way he spoke, and the way he looked at a room full of people and felt responsible for all of them. She was a scientist. She did not like leaving things unclassified. She turned to a fresh page. She wrote, Courage is not the absence of fear. I do not know if they feel fear the way I do, but I have watched one of them bleed and keep moving, and I have watched another stand in front of a room and say aloud that she was wrong, and I have watched a man remember where every civilian was during a firefight, and I think the word I am looking for is not strength. It is not aggression. It is something closer to choice. They can stop. They choose not to. She sat back. She thought about her supervisor's smile. She understood it now. 3 days after the raid, the 5th Keth raider came back. Valera was not in the medical bay this time. She was in the main research lab, running spectrographic analysis on a set of atmospheric samples from a planet 2 systems over, when the alert sounded. She had been expecting it, not precisely, but in the background way that Garrett's warning had settled into her thinking. She had started noting the position of security officers when she walked through the station. She had started memorizing the locations of the emergency lockers. She had stopped leaving her research quarters without her personal comm unit. She was, she realized, doing something she had never done before in 11 months on the station. She was paying attention to her environment in a practical way, not as a scientist observing a subject, but as a living being who understood she existed in a place that was not entirely safe. She did not know whether to be unsettled by that or grateful for it. The alert specified Corridor 7, near the cargo bays. Valera locked down her samples, noted the time in her log with the automatic precision of a scientist who documents everything, and moved toward the secure secondary corridor that the security team had designated as a shelter path during the previous debrief. She was halfway there when she heard a sound that stopped her. It was a child's voice. There were 4 children on the station. She had cataloged them as she cataloged everything. 2 of them belonged to a geologist named Hank and his partner Carrie, a boy of 9 named Owen, and a girl of 6 named Maya. The other 2 were siblings, 12 and 10, named Danny and Luca, who had arrived with their mother 6 weeks ago for what was supposed to be a 2-month research posting. The voice she heard was Maya's. It was coming from the wrong direction. Valera stood in the corridor and assessed the situation with the rapid clarity of a mind that had spent 300 hours analyzing threat data in the past 3 days. The shelter path was 30 meters to her right. The voice was coming from a storage alcove about 20 meters to her left, between her and Corridor 7. She did not know exactly where the raider was. She did not know how long she had. She did know that a 6-year-old was in that alcove, and that small children did not always stay quiet under pressure. She went left. Maya was crouched behind a stack of supply crates in the alcove, her knees pulled up, her face very white. She had a small toy in her hands, a soft replica of some Terran animal, and she was holding it so tightly that her knuckles had gone pale. Valera crouched down in front of her. She tried to arrange her expression into something that would not frighten a 6-year-old human. She was aware that her species had features that some humans found startling: the secondary eyelids, the slight luminescence around the iris, the too smooth skin. She had been told, on one occasion by a slightly drunk engineer, that she looked like a beautiful statue that had learned to walk. Maya stared at her. "My mama went to get Owen," Maya whispered. "She said stay here, she said do not move." "That was good advice," Valera said quietly. "Your mama was right. We are going to stay here together, yes?" Maya nodded. She looked at Valera with the large, trusting eyes of a child who had decided, in the uncomplicated way of children, that the adult in front of her was safe. Valera had never been trusted by a child before. She found it considerably more affecting than she had expected. She pressed herself against the crates beside Maya and opened her comm unit, keeping the sound low. She sent a text-only message to the security channel: "Researcher and child, storage alcove 7C, awaiting all clear." She did not want the sound of a voice to carry. The response came back in 30 seconds from Garrett: "Stay put, coming to you." She sent back understood. She sat in the alcove with Maya and waited. Maya, after approximately 2 minutes of silence, whispered, "Are you scared?" Valera considered the question carefully. She had 4 functional cardiac chambers, and at this moment she was quite sure she could hear all 4 of them. "Yes," she said honestly. Maya seemed to find this comforting rather than alarming. "Me too," she said. She shifted slightly closer to Valera, not quite touching, in the way of a child who wanted contact but was uncertain whether it was allowed. "Garrett says that being scared just means you know something matters." Valera looked at the child. "He told you that?" "He says lots of things. He teaches me card tricks sometimes." Maya's voice dropped even lower. "I'm not very good at the card tricks yet." "I imagine you will improve." "He says that too." Maya was quiet for a moment. "He's been here longer than anyone except Hank. He knows everybody's name." "Yes," Valera said quietly. "I have noticed that." They stayed very still while the sounds of the corridor filtered in, distant, controlled, the sound of people moving with purpose. Valera tracked what she could hear. 1 set of footsteps, then 2, then the unmistakable exchange of someone challenging someone else. A short burst of sound that might have been a scuffle. Quiet. Then Garrett's voice over the general comm, calm and unhurried. "Corridor 7 secure. All clear station-wide. Personnel may return to standard movement protocols. Maya let out a breath that seemed far too big for her small body. Valera put her hand on the child's shoulder without thinking about it. It was not a gesture she would normally have made. Physical contact between species required careful mutual understanding, and she had never been the sort of scientist who touched her research subjects, even metaphorically. But her hand was on Maya's shoulder before she had made a decision about it, and Maya leaned very slightly into the contact, and Valera found she did not remove her hand. When Garrett came to the alcove a few minutes later, he took one look at the two of them, and something in his face went quiet and steady in a way that was different from his usual steadiness. He crouched down to Maya's level. "Hey, Bug," he said, "you okay?" "I stayed put," Maya said, "like Mama said." "Good job." He reached out and briefly touched the top of her head in a way that looked completely natural and also like something he had done before many times. "Your mom's on her way. She's got Owen." "Is everyone okay?" "Everyone's okay." Maya scrambled to her feet and went to meet her mother, who appeared at the end of the corridor at a speed that suggested she had been running. The reunion involved several seconds of intense hugging and some crying that was not purely Maya's. Valera watched from the alcove entrance. Garrett came to stand beside her. "One raider," he said quietly, "same individual who escaped the first time. He'd come back for the data cores after all. We were waiting for him." "You anticipated his return." "It's what I would have done," he said. "Resource-scarce environment, first attempt failed. If the target is still there, you try again with better information." "You think like they do." "You have to." He watched the mother and children down the corridor for a moment. "That's the part of this job nobody really tells you. You don't just protect people from threats. You have to understand the threats well enough to be one step ahead, which means you spend a lot of time thinking about dark things." "Does that affect you?" she asked. "Thinking about dark things." He was quiet for a moment, and she appreciated that he did not immediately give her a reassuring answer. "Yeah," he said at last, "it does. You learn to put it somewhere it doesn't bleed into everything else, doesn't always work." "How do you manage it when it does not work?" "Honestly," he looked at her sideways, "mostly I find something that reminds me why the job matters. Usually it's a person. Usually it's pretty simple." She thought about Maya saying, "He knows everybody's name." She thought about the way he had moved through that broken door frame 3 nights ago, bleeding, unhesitating, because he had seen her come in an hour earlier and remembered. "Simple," she said. "Simple," he agreed. Down the corridor, Carrie was holding both her children very tightly, and Maya was saying something that made her mother laugh through whatever she was feeling, and the sound of it filled the corridor like something warm and unguarded. Valera watched it with a feeling she could not immediately name. She was, she understood, going to have to expand her vocabulary considerably. On her last night on the station, Valera sat in the common room and tried to write the concluding section of her report. She had been trying to write it for 4 days. She had 312 pages of notes, 22 separate analytical frameworks, and 16 months of collected data. She had observations on human sleep patterns, human nutritional habits, human physical resilience, and human social bonding structures. She had more information about Homo sapiens than most Tavari researchers accumulated in a standard 3-year posting. She could not find a way to begin. The problem was not a lack of material. The problem was that the conclusions she had arrived at were not the conclusions she had come to find. She had arrived intending to produce a careful, measured assessment of human capabilities and limitations for the Tavari Academic Council, the kind of document that would inform future policy on human Tavari cooperation and establish clear guidelines for how the two species should interact. She had intended to write something useful and distant, full of measured language and careful qualification. Instead, she had 11 months of observations that had been quietly, completely undone by the last few weeks, and she was not sure how to explain to the academic council that the problem with their understanding of humans was not the data they lacked, but the lens they had been using to look at what they had. She was still staring at the blank page when Garrett came in. He was off duty. She could tell by the absence of the armor, replaced by plain clothes, and the particular slightly worn look of a person at the end of a long rotation. He went to the coffee station with the automatic ease of someone who had done it 10,000 times, made a cup with far too much sugar, and then noticed her at the table and lifted the cup slightly in a gesture that asked, without words, "Do you want one?" She had never had coffee before. "Yes," she said. He brought 2 cups and sat across from her. He looked at the blank page on her data pad and did not ask about it, which she appreciated. She tasted the coffee. It was deeply strange. It was bitter and sweet simultaneously, which was not a combination her species found naturally in food. The warmth of it was unexpected. She held the cup in both hands and sat with the sensation for a moment. "Well," he asked. "It is very strange," she said. "Too much sugar." "The sugar is the only reason it is not purely unpleasant." She looked at it. "I can see why you drink it." "High praise." "It is honest praise." She looked at the blank page. "I am trying to write my conclusion." "The report on us." "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "How's it going?" "Badly." She set down the coffee cup. "I arrived with a theoretical framework that described humans as a species of high aggression and low self-regulation with limited capacity for abstract cooperation. I intended to produce a report confirming or refining that framework." She paused. "I cannot do that." "Because the framework was wrong." "Because I was wrong." She looked at him steadily. "The framework was mine. I built it from a distance, using secondary sources and filtered data, and I came here with it already in place. I observed your species for 16 months, and I saw what I expected to see." "Until the raid," he said. "Until the raid," she agreed, "and after the debrief, Maya in the alcove." She was quiet for a moment. "I have been trying to identify the specific moment when my understanding shifted, and I cannot locate it exactly. It was not one moment. It was accumulation." Garrett looked at his coffee. "What changed most?" She thought about how to answer. She was Tavari. She had been trained to be precise. "I came here believing that your species was defined by its aggression," she said. "You are physically strong, you are fast, you fight readily and well. That is true. But I categorized it incorrectly. I thought the aggression was the center, and the rest, the cooperation, the loyalty, the care, was peripheral. Behavioral adaptations that helped the aggression function more efficiently." She picked up the coffee cup again, held it without drinking. "I had it reversed," she said. "The care is the center. You are willing to fight, you are very willing to fight, but only because you have already decided that certain things are worth fighting for. The capacity for violence and the capacity for connection are not separate in you. They come from the same place. The same animal that would walk through a burning door for a stranger would also sit with a frightened child until her mother arrived." Garrett was very still across the table from her. "In Tavari culture," she continued, "we separate those things. Protectors protect, caregivers care. The roles are distinct and it is considered poor form to blur them. I think we believe it keeps things cleaner." She paused. "I think perhaps it keeps things colder." The station was quiet around them. It was late, the kind of late that existed inside pressurized metal boxes floating in space, where late was not darkness but silence, the particular quiet of a place where people had finally stopped moving. "I don't know that much about Tavari culture," Garrett said at last. "Almost no one does. We are private. We share carefully and only what we consider relevant." She looked at her cup. "I have been told more than once that my species is cold." "Is it?" "We are reserved. There is a difference, but I am not certain all of my people would make that distinction." She looked at him. "I would not have made it before this assignment." "What will you do with the report?" I will write the truth, she said. I will tell the Academic Council that their framework for understanding human behavior requires significant revision, that the assumptions underlying our current cooperation protocols are based on a mischaracterization of human motivation. She straightened slightly. I will tell them that humans are not violent animals who have learned to cooperate. They are cooperative beings who are willing to be dangerous when the things they have chosen to protect are threatened. The distinction is not minor. It changes everything about how we should approach partnership with your species. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. That's generous, he said at last. It is accurate, she said. Accuracy occasionally resembles generosity. I have noticed this. She looked at him directly. I will also include in the personal addendum that my supervisor will read and the council will not, that this revision in my understanding was caused significantly by the actions and character of one specific individual on the station. Something moved in his expression. He did not say anything. I spent 16 months watching your species, she said. You were the one who made me understand it. I just did my job, he said, and she believed that he believed that entirely. Yes, she said. That is precisely what I mean. They sat for a while with their coffee in the quiet of the station, and Valera thought about what she would write. She thought about the word she had been searching for since that first night, the word her language did not have, the word that described a being that chose responsibility for everything around it, not because it was required to, but because it had already decided, on some level so deep it did not require conscious thought, that the people around it mattered. She thought about a man who remembered where every civilian was during a firefight. She thought about a child who learned card tricks from a security officer. She thought about a woman who stood in front of a room and said plainly that she had been wrong. She thought about all of it and she thought, I have been wrong for a long time. The universe is stranger and better than my notes suggested. Later, when Garrett walked her to the docking bay where her shuttle waited, he shook her hand in the human way that she had always found slightly odd. 4 fingers to 5. The math of it was imperfect. She had thought once that this was a metaphor for everything about human-Tavari interaction. 2 species reaching for each other across a difference that could not be entirely bridged. She thought now that she had been looking at it wrong. It was not about the difference, it was about the reaching. If you're ever back in this system, Garrett said. I will send a message, she said, ahead of time. So you know to expect a civilian in the research wing. The corner of his mouth moved. I always know where the civilians are. I know, she said. I will send a message anyway. She walked up the shuttle ramp and did not look back, because she was Tavari and Tavari did not look back at things that moved them. But she kept her hand against the wall of the shuttle for a moment after the ramp closed, and she stood very still, and she thought, I came here expecting to study something simple. She had found something she could spend a lifetime trying to understand. She sat down at the shuttle's small desk and opened her data pad to the blank conclusion page.